basically the Loyalist Defence League, that's who organised them, and they're all defending statues or whatever. So when I got there, to cover the event, there was no Black Lives Matters or Antifa, affiliated people that I could see, and not surprising really. I mean, if they did go to the square, and on seeing that, they would have turned back.
Welcome to episode 82 of Rebel City Podcast. This week's guest is Tommy Gakinwan. Tommy is a photographer who usually takes pictures of musical theatre and the arts, but in the last wee while he has found himself in the middle of a couple of protests, and we speak to him about that. So Tommy told us about his experiences in Hong Kong, but the reason that we really wanted to get him on was to tell us about his experiences in George Square. Tommy was in George Square on Saturday the 13th of June and found himself being intimidated by loyalists and right-wing thugs. We really get into the BLM movement, tearing down statues and protest in general, and we have a wee go at sort of talking about what are some of the solutions that we can come up to help combat this. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please like, share, and any shout outs, give us a shout at Rebel City Pod on Twitter. So hello and welcome to another episode of Rebel City Podcast. This week's guest is Tommy Gakinwan. Tommy, how's it going?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too
nice
bad.
To meet you.
One of the guys that listens to the podcast sent me a message and asked me if I live in my beanie, so I decided to let my hair out the day, but I've got some kind of like Terry Wogan 70s like sort of thing going on here, so apologies, but I thought I would just prove that I've actually got hair because somebody called me out on it.
We'll listen to the audience's feedback here.
Absolutely, you carried on. So, Tommy, you were brought to my attention because of a post that I had seen on Facebook about your experiences last weekend at George Square, and we'll get into that in a wee bit. What was actually hilarious was when I went to try and find you on social media, I followed you across all social media anyway, which was weird.
Oh, right, okay.
I hadn't put the two and two together. But do you want to just sort of like give us a wee sort of introduction just so people know who you are, and then we'll get into
it? Well, my name's Tommy Gakinwan. I'm a photographer based here in Glasgow.
Nice and sharp, mate. That's it. I get a wee bit more than that, mate. Like the photography that I'd seen on, I think that's what attracted me initially, maybe about a year ago or whatever. I'd seen some of your stuff on Instagram, and
sure.
The pictures that you're taking are incredible, mate, and some of it like really sort of poignant and stuff right now as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of my professional work is actually in sort of theatre and classical music performance type stuff, but yeah, my Instagram is sort of a mix of that, but it probably leans heavier towards my personal work, which is basically just documenting, everything I see, basically.
Mm-hmm. It must be. I mean, it's a bit of an industry photography. I think everybody that gets a camera wants to be a photographer and start an Instagram. So you must be doing well if you're cutting through the field, mate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been doing it for nearly 15 years. Yeah, 15 years now. So. Yeah, I love it. I wouldn't want to do anything else, but to be honest, with the state of particularly the theatre industry right now, I can't get back to home for a while. I've been thinking about whether or not I should be looking at other career paths.
Mm-hmm. I suppose the theatre industry might be a while before they get back, it'll be
a long time, I think.
Yeah. Mm.
So in terms of some of the work that I've seen, I've obviously just kind of picked up and engaged with your stuff as a result of knowing that you were coming on. I was quite taken, and it kind of will hopefully kind of echo some of what we're going to talk about down the line. It's some really amazing photography for the protests in Hong Kong. Was that something that you travelled to, or you just right place, right time? What was your experience of that?
Yeah, it was a bit of both. So I've got family in Hong Kong. That's where my dad's from. So although he lives here. So I go to Hong Kong maybe once a year, to visit family and friends there. Sometimes I get some work there if I'm lucky. But I was especially keen to go last year when I did because of the protests as well. So yeah, I mean, I take a bit of an interest in Hong Kong politics, and I'm really really amazing the scenes there, and the just sort of like indefatigability of the protesters there. They're not giving up. Although to be honest, I don't really see a happy ending for Hong Kong. I can't see I just don't know how that's going to end well.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things in the UK that's maybe suffered for some of what we might again touch on down the line. I take, as much as I was aware of protests in Hong Kong, going back years, the most recent stuff, I had to actually pretty much like go and Google it because I wasn't 100% on where things were. I know obviously this is largely centred, or the current issue is largely centred around, extradition to places like mainland China and mainland China and stuff like that. As I was reading through it, like quite a lot of topics came up that, have been echoed in the Black Lives Matter protests in recent weeks. And, certainly your experience having been in George Square in the last week, around how the police have behaved and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
In terms of like when you were in Hong Kong, is this the first time you've experienced that type of like environment, or is it something that you kind of sought out a lot?
No, I wouldn't say I seek it out, and I suppose I've never seen anything quite like Hong Kong. That level of like proper riots. Smashing up banks and stuff like that. It was intense. And when I was there talking to some of the protesters, they were saying that that the Chinese are a bit, the government there, they're too savvy to send in the army. That wouldn't look good. But what some of the protesters there were telling me was, in the course of a couple of weeks, the Hong Kong police were suddenly all looking very buff and talking Mandarin to each other. So they think that they just sent the army in and dressed up as Hong Kong policemen.
Right. Which
it wouldn't surprise me.
A lot of people.
It would definitely wouldn't surprise me in the slightest anyway. So if we just come up to last weekend, I think one of the main reasons why I was so keen to get you to come in and speak to us is I think that there's a lot of Glaswegians, and we try and frame the podcast around activism in Glasgow and like movements that happen within the city, just to highlight to people what's going on in their own doorstep. Because I think in the internet and information age, like we lose a wee bit of sort of locality, a certain activism, or just any sort of scheme, whether it be mental health or like sort of social. And I felt that when I read the story on Facebook, it was ridiculously powerful, but it didn't sound like Glasgow to me. It felt so foreign. So would it be all right if you just sort of tell the listeners like what actually happened last weekend?
Yep. So I went along to George Square. I knew that there was there had been planned protests, Black Lives Matter. But there were also, of course, counter-protests. So basically, the Loyalist Defence League, that's who organised them. And they're all, defending statues or whatever. So when I got there, to cover the event, there was no Black Lives Matters or Antifa, affiliated people that I could see. And not surprising, really. I mean, if they did go to the square, and on seeing that, they would have turned back because it was a really ugly atmosphere, really menacing.
Yeah.
And what was the experience like for you? I mean, if you've got your camera there and you're there to sort of document, like what was the attitude towards you as what would look like a member of the press?
Well, press, so there were a bunch of press photographers, and, when I was standing with them, congregating in a group, I did feel, fairly safe. Of course, that said, though, there were a lot more threats. I suppose you get that as a press photographer, but it was much more than I've ever experienced before. Can I swear?
Of course.
Sort of, comments like, you get that fucking camera stuck up your arse, that kind of thing. So all the press guys were getting that. But then when I was separated from them, then I certainly felt a lot less safe because I wasn't dressed like a typical press photographer either. I probably looked like what in their heads an Antifa activist looks like. The fact that I was taking photos, but also the way I looked. Not just, the racism, I think, was kind of just a way that I don't think that's why necessarily they were abusing me. It was just the means that they chose for those other reasons.
What was the sort of police's attitude? How do you feel like Police Scotland handled the situation as you saw it?
So, I remember at the time actually being quite impressed by how swift they were. You know, when there was a flare-up of, whatever, just basically these guys thinking they'd seen somebody and so, they'd run towards them. The police were very efficient, at cutting them off and, maintaining order to a degree. When I wrote that post, I was feeling quite frustrated, I suppose, by playing the events over in my head, realising that, what had happened to me and nothing had really been done. That didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, being told that I had to leave or, made to feel that I was the problem.
Yeah. So I was going to say, that's definitely part of the Facebook post that I read, where I was like, you've pretty much been, and I was quite surprised by your initial reaction being to just kind of accept and move on, because it did read as though you were essentially victim blamed for pretty much the get-go.
To be honest, after what happened to me, I was probably leaving anyway, because I wouldn't have, didn't feel safe, so I would have probably left for that reason or something else. But yeah, it's a tough one. I will say though, I've had a couple of meetings with the police this week, and they have been quite good, listening to and responding to those complaints. I was surprised by, so they showed me how the investigation proceeds here. They try not to make any arrests on the day, just from the point of view of maintaining order, try not to escalate things.
Mm-hmm.
But they go through CCTV and all that, and they identify where instances of criminality took place, and then they pursue it then. Which, I was kind of impressed by the resources that they have. I mean, of course, the police, but I don't think about these things. So I've decided not to pursue any kind of formal complaint against them in that way, because they do seem very keen to crack down on this kind of thing, at least from what they told me. And I was told that senior, people very senior in the police are taking this very seriously, and they are, they were very keen to talk about what happened to me and the lessons that can be learned from that.
Yeah, that's reassuring to me in a way, because I think like when I read it, when I read in the subsequent days, I mean, we're now 6 days, and there's been 3 protests since the one that or maybe 2 since the one that we're actually talking about last weekend. There's one during the week and one this morning, and there had been 0 arrests. And you're like, well, what the fuck is going on? Because we're getting videos of people being hyper violent, hyper threatening, and the police just seem to be standing back. Although, you're saying, they're segregating it and they're policing it in the sense that they're keeping people away from each other, but they're not making arrests. And it's reassuring to me to hear that they then go back and view the footage and then maybe hold people to account.
Yeah, and the officer did tell me, sorry, this is in the conversation I've had this week with them, that said though, they will make arrests, if it's absolutely really blatant stuff, or at least they should. And I suppose, looking back on it, and when I had to give a statement, really think about everything that had happened, I suppose I was taken a bit for granted that what had happened to me was kind of known and visible to the police. Whereas, in the kind of blur, thinking about it, I can't be certain of that. And I suppose if I had, but you don't really think this logically in that moment. But if I had been able to then say to an officer, "This just happened to me. He said that or he did that," then actually that would have been probably more helpful to them in terms of making an arrest, I suppose. But I was just kind of assuming that did you not fucking see that?
I think
understandable, especially in the context of the second incident, as you went to your bike and were confronted by the 3 guys who were essentially using racial slurs against you almost directly in the presence of a police officer. I think one of the lessons I'd certainly like to see them learn, if that's what they're trying to do, is that your details and statements should have been taken. If he's standing next to you watching this, or within the close proximity of these guys backing up out the street to try and see what kind of reaction they're going to get.
Absolutely.
They could have definitely been more proactive there. So if they're learning lessons, fair enough, because that's been one of the big things for me, seeing violence on the streets and not seeing people being cut into, police vans and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the notion that it's happened sort of,
Mm-hmm.
after the fact definitely is a reassurance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think what's interesting about what you just said there as well is that we had seen claims from people that were there saying that it was Antifa, Green Brigade, or Celtic supporters that actually started the scuffle that you've obviously get caught up in, but you're saying that there was no evidence of that for what you had seen.
Well, I know that. I arrived at George Square about 1:00 that day, and from what I could tell, or not, well, from what I was told rather, the sort of the main unrest and violence had been before. So that might be the event you're talking about. But by the time I got there, I don't think there were any Antifa or Black Lives Matter activists around, protesters, and I don't really know the affiliations of the folk that were there. I mean, obviously, as I say, the Loyalist Defence League organised it, but I think there were all kinds of groups because there was certainly enough fighting among themselves actually.
Oh, really?
Which is a fairly recurring theme, to be fair. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I live across from what used to be the Nacho Novo bar, but it's now just a Rangers supporter bar. And it always amazes me how much fucking fighting and violence they can inflict upon each other. It's not even Celtic fans.
I think seeing in the face of the violence and obvious attempts to intimidate, that's probably one of the things that, as I've watched events unfold here and elsewhere in the world, that I find quite worrying. There is an uptick in pushback against people reporting these issues. We've seen it on the CNNs as reporters are arrested live on TV. We're hearing for yourself where you've been singled out based on essentially how you look and how you were dressed, but essentially you were there reporting what was going on. I mean, what do we do to combat this? Because we know who the people are in this community that are causing the trouble. The day we see that the leaders have been invited to the city council to have tea and biscuits with the leaders of the city council. I mean, I don't personally know if that's the way I'd like to approach it. I'd like to see less violence on the streets before we engage with people, because otherwise we run the risk of validating the violence that people like you have faced. Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I have any answers in that regard. Whether the change in this comes from kind of protests or from the street level, or whether it comes from above, as you say, from the council.
I would like to see. I mean, we've done an episode before with people when we spoke about the Orange Order at length, I think, on our podcast. I would personally like to see Scotland's version of the KKK not on our streets, not protected by the police while they get pished and run riot through our city 4 or 5 times a year. I would like to see that be the first thing that we do, is we don't allow that to happen.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I sort of, obviously, I mean, I'm really staunch defender of free speech, and I think people must have the right to gather and to march, but the line has to be drawn when, as you say, consistently, it's just a cause for total unrest, and it's allowed to continue still.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what was it? I mean, what was that? Somebody spitting a priest or something, and all they did was just change the route so that
and even then they fought it.
Yeah.
I think that's just enabling, really, isn't it? That's the Scottish Government, Glasgow City Council and Police Scotland just taking the easy way out. But ultimately, in my opinion, it leads to the validation of these ideas, and then people like us sit back and wonder why do these people think like that, and why do they think it's okay to take to the streets and view these opinions? Surely in 2020 we're past that, when on the other side of the coin we have government, council and police basically just sitting saying nothing about what goes on and has been going on in Scotland since day dot. Do you know what I mean? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Nicola Sturgeon, is quick to condemn, as she should. But from last time I checked, anyway, there's been silence from the rest of the political parties, and it's probably more important that they speak out, actually.
Yeah. Absolutely, but there's no surprise to find out that there's an Orange Lodge inside Westminster, and so then we find out why. We hear nothing on it because they don't want to upset their mates and their lodge members, which is an unfortunate truth. Do you think that there was anything actually behind? So I know that the loyalists, or whatever we want to refer to them to, do you think that they actually care about statues, or do you think that they're just coming down for a punch up and a piss up?
Yeah, absolutely the latter. I mean, they were just itching for a fight any chance they could get. I can't imagine they care much about the statues at all.
Yeah, do you think they even know what the statues are in George Square?
Exactly.
I don't doubt it, considering during the protest that sort of Tommy was, assaulted in, like, they were there to protect statues of Peel, who, was founder of the British Police, while simultaneously with British Police. So, exactly. If that's no like a visual metaphor for their confusion, like, I don't really know what is.
I think, like, another sort of shocking thing to me as a Glaswegian, and a proud Glaswegian, was that you had mentioned that you felt safer in the Hong Kong protests that are basically being against what we're told, or not what we're told, but we know is like a sort of communist China. They're the bad guys. Like, look at what they're doing over there. We're better than them, and yet, like, we've got people like yourself that are saying that you felt safer in a protest against that government than what you did in Glasgow.
I think, obviously, the part of that, though, is that so in Hong Kong, they were effectively, peaceful protests until the police came along. The police in Hong Kong were what made it not peaceful. Even though, when if in Hong Kong, for example, when you saw some police brutality, you felt a bit safer because you knew that you were surrounded by 1,000 other protesters that are on your side. Whereas in that, just in that event there, it was completely one-sided. It's just these thugs fighting with themselves and with the police. I suppose, in my capacity as a sort of a bystander or a photographer, obviously I'm, trust that the police would protect me, but not enough of them. Mainly. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that they're I mean, I've seen a lot of sort of defund the police stuff, and I think this is obviously coming more for like the American side of stuff. I would personally like to see the money rooted into training for these types of situations instead of spending millions and billions of pounds on armoured cars and basically like the militarisation of the police, like Kevlar vests. Why?
Yeah, absolutely.
None of them are trained in like hand-to-hand combat. Like,
and the police force should need a tank.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, can't argue that at all. Obviously, I think in America, thankfully, the British police don't have any tanks, but the routing of money to sort of means of either preventing or de-escalating troubles seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, man. I mean, it actually like shocks me. I practice martial arts, and one of the guys that I study under, I don't know how you would even refer to it, he's one of Scotland's top martial artists, and he went to Police Scotland and offered to make a training programme for their police officers so that and it's Filipino martial arts, so it's based in sword and stick, which would be perfect in these types of situations. And he said that he get absolutely nowhere with the government, nowhere with the police force. They did not want to know any of it. They said, we're fine, we train them fine. And that actually shocked me. I would have thought that they would have been paying for experts in these fields to come and train their officers. It's insane to think that they're asked to go into what is a volatile situation with little to no fucking training. And do you know what I mean? It just seems crazy. I'm not going to
I
feel.
think there's some basic shit that could be getting better, but I mean, the notion that, as you say, Tommy's sitting there talking about having, his camera, his livelihood, and his person threatened, and the response is, "You get out of here, you're making this worse." Like, there's got to be a bit of balance as well, where I probably would need to understand that a lot gets asked of police, but at the same time, there's some really basic shit that could be a hell of a lot better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's I saw an interesting sort of infographic or whatever it was, talking about Britain wasn't mentioned in this, but talking about the difference in say America. How it takes it takes a month training you get, and then you're in, when you join the police.
Yeah.
In countries like Finland or whatever, it's 3 years training. It's a degree. Because it is a highly skilled and very important job. There's no reason that it shouldn't, be done by the best people.
Yeah, I think we expect them as well. And I think when you talk about defunding the police, this is where it gets important, because some people on the right are saying defund the police means abolish the police. It absolutely does not. It means taking the money away that's being spent ineffectively and investing it in a community so that the police are needed less. Because I don't think when we talk about training what they're asked, I don't think I really see a job where somebody should be perfectly qualified in how to act essentially as a social worker at somebody's front door, whilst also control a riot. You know what I mean? Like, those are two skill sets that probably should never have went together in the first place. You know what I mean? So when we defund, we say, well, let's take the social worker element of them and actually be that to social workers, or etc. So I think it's important that we frame that, defunding question the right way.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
there's been a lot of willful conflation on that.
Definitely. I mean, there was some comedian I think I was listening to, and he was talking about how you're back in the day, your barber, your dentist, and your doctor were all the same person. So when you say defund the barber, you're not saying get rid of haircuts. Just don't ask the barber to do your teeth as well.
Yeah. I've not heard that one. That's a good one.
And that's a good one. What do you think about the situation that we've seen in Bristol, where they pulled down the statue and threw it in the river? So me and Matt were talking about this off mic, and my initial reaction was, where are we going with this? I get why people have done it, and I understand. I get, but I just didn't really get where we were going with it. But also, I didn't know who Edward Coulson was until the next day, and I stuck into Google and I found out all about the guy. And I suppose that in that sense, it was fit for purpose, because if we went and get the analytics, I'm pretty sure that guy's never been Googled in the way that he got Googled in that Monday morning. It was just to see, what was your feeling on the aesthetic of them pulling down the statue and dragging it and throwing it in the river?
Yeah, I think that, as you say, it does raise awareness in that way. I was talking to my mum about it, and she, doesn't particularly follow politics or history, but and she was like, "God, I had no idea about all that." And so, as you say, that's doing its job in that way. And yeah, I think these statues belong in museums with the truth about these people, and it is important to recognise the symbolism of civic monuments and that kind of thing. But a part of me also thinks that the statue thing is just a bit of a distraction, or it's not it shouldn't really be what we're focusing on. I mean, obviously it's all connected, and as I say, symbolism is important, but while people are getting shot and killed, I just think it's a bit more to focus on than statues. It's not the thing.
It's definitely a bit of background noise and a bit of distraction in a lot of respects for me as well, because for me, I would just be saying to folk that, feel they are, victims, or, their heritage has been, part of the oppression that these statues represent, then I would say leave it up to them. Like, I don't have, any sort of ancestors who were slaves to my knowledge or anything like that. So I find it quite difficult to form an opinion on a slave owner other than slavery is bad. You know what I mean? So I don't know that my voice is one that should be listened to when it comes to what we do with statues or street names. But at the same time, I think if there are communities out there that feel that things in the public life are offensive to them, then they should absolutely have some sort of recourse to correct that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
right now, that's to put a plaque on everything and make us own it. You know what I mean? Like, that would be the only thing I'd say is, like, let's put a plaque under these various people and say, here's the actual reality of how many people they owned and traded and died under their care and whatever else, and actually just put it all there front and centre so that we have to actually, like, confront it personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I went last year as part of the Doors Open Day festival. I went on a tour with Councillor Graham Campbell,
Right.
African Caribbean Glasgow City Councillor, and he was saying that his surname is Campbell because that's the name that the man who owned his ancestors gave him. And I said, you ever think about, giving that name up then? He says, yeah, of course, think about it, but it's a part of me and it's a part of my history, and I don't, you don't want to forget that story happened. So it's,
yeah. And you probably come across as many people on the other side of it that have, I know loads of examples of people of colour who've changed their names to, negate that exact issue where they want to, throw off essentially, a slave name, which is also fair play.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But I think, like, my main worry with the tearing down of things is really just seeded in the rise of the right wing that we're seeing, and the way that people are being sold this sort of bullshit notion that their culture is under attack by these radical left. And it's, and I hate to say that it's the way that it looks, but that's what when I really sort of thought about it and dug down, that's what I was like, I feel a wee bit uncomfortable with how it looks to people. And also, like, we're seeing in George Square, people are using football teams and all sorts of bullshit to get people on their side. Like, this is, I mean, we can't even have a global pandemic, but it's being politicised into the left versus the right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
sorry, I was going to say, when we have statue defenders, what we should do is make them form a queue at a statue, but on the side of the statue that's no facing the plaque, and be like, tell me who this person is. Tell me,
sure.
Like, if they can answer like 4 questions on the dude who the statue's about, they can go and stand in front of it. If they don't, need to go and try another statue.
I worked in Virgin Megastore back in the day, and when Jackass came out and everybody was wearing the Ramones t-shirts, remember there was that whole sort of trend. Young guys and like teenagers would come up to the counter, and had a work colleague that would say to them, you need to name the guys on the t-shirt or name one of their album, or I'm not selling you the t-shirt. And the amount of people that would have to go to a different till. So it's like sort of like cultural gateway. Like, you're not allowed to protect a statue unless you can tell me who the dude is. Nah, I've not got a clue. Right, away you go. Fuck off. Why do you think that we've got this yearning for empire or greatness in the West? Like, why are we seeing this all? I mean, I genuinely thought that we were kind of past this. I suppose I'm just admitting to my ignorance and naivety, really, but I genuinely felt that we'd moved past this in the sort of 2000s, but we've seen this sort of rise of, like, misty-eyed looking back and people sort of arguing Churchill, he was a great man, and then the other side's like, well, he killed 1 million people through famine, and we're sort of, I don't know, we're in like the culture wars right now, but we're definitely seeing people sort of yearn for this greatness, and we see it in sort of the language that's being used by Trump, like make America great again, keep America great again, and like, why are we doing this? Like, what's going on? Are we witnessing the death of that? Is this the sort of death croaks, do you think, or do you genuinely think that it's coming back up as like a popular idea?
That's a tough one. I think probably, I would hope that, as you say, it's the death croaks. It's so much of it. It's just got to be. I mean, the solution to that has got to be just education. And I know that there's been talk about that kind of thing. A class that teaches the history of empire. Truthfully, I just finished reading a book called The Colour of Time, and it's photographs colorized and goes through history from 1860 to 1960, something like that, 100 years. And I just couldn't believe the stuff I was learning, like apart from World War II, Britain has always been the bad guy. Like the horrors, the stuff they do. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I can't understand it for like if somebody knew that, how can you know that and still get teary-eyed when God Save the Queen comes on? How can you wave that flag knowing all the murder that's been done in its name? It's unbelievable.
I was having a conversation with my mate online about some of these, historical things, and the kind of conclusion that I came to is that I think racism and this sort of imperial, sort of colonial past is something that, because people haven't been educated on it properly and haven't actually been taught the reality of it, it allows them to look back on a level of, quote unquote greatness with a misty eye. And I think that, like when the Black Lives Matter thing sort of kicked off in recent weeks, there's a lot of people who mistook their own sort of complacency on these issues. So for me, for example, like we were talking about various issues and being like, it's always been there. Police brutality has always been there. Racism's always been there. Issues, disparities in health and finance, they're all there for us to see, and we'll kind of like learn to kind of almost have a blind spot for it. And it's not been malicious, but it has happened, and we need to confront it. And I think as people have went through the process, other people have taken it personally, and as we've been complacent with racism as a society, they've taken that as them going, well, you just as a result, and you're like, that's not always the case. And notions of empire and these types of things, it's kind of similar, where people have their ideas, the notion of like national self on these kind of historical lies that they've been told, and now that these lies are, mistruths are under attack, they feel like they're under attack as a result, when in actual fact the two things are completely separate. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know, I think that's the closest I can get to why, the history that we've been mistold kind of is impacting on us today, because people are taking that realisation that we've not addressed it properly in the past as a criticism at the end of the now, which again was necessarily what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact is, these people at George Square, these sort of thugs, I mean, they're not going anywhere yet. We have to live in society with them, so the best we can do is try and change their ideas. Yeah, and I mean, you hope that even though this sort of violence on our streets is not a good thing, but in a way, it's, as you say, it's always been there, and maybe it's better that it's out in the open for everyone to see, and so that society can acknowledge it, and then by acknowledging it, hopefully begin to change it in a positive way.
I agree. I would rather know. Like I'm in that, like, definitely in that sort of school of thought is that I don't want it to be hidden. I think that's what the problem has been at the point that I was making earlier about my own ignorance, is that for the last sort of, if we take, let's just say pre-Trump or before that, it was there. It just wasn't highlighted, or it was kept in the sort of, like, I don't know, like the underground type thing, and now it's actually like a more popular idea they're starting to come out. And I would absolutely rather that we spoke about these things, like you were saying earlier on. Like, we need free speech. We absolutely need free speech so that we can argue back against ideas. And I suppose that's another worrying trait that we've seen for like the internet age, is that people just want to shut it down. If they don't like it, just shut it down.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the problems that we're seeing right now is just a consequence of like the sort of the way that we've been going as a society for like the last sort of 20-25 years in that regard.
I think that's prevalent even in, how these violent outbursts have occurred in Glasgow in the last week, because the people who have perpetrated this are people we have tolerated and have been violent multiple times already in the last year. So I don't think racism is necessarily the only thing we've got a blind spot on. I think it's been convenient for all of us to kind of almost look the other way, as people like the Orange Order have marched, through our streets, spreading, hate and singing songs about being up to, their knees in people's blood and whatnot. I think that, it has to go beyond racism, because as much as these guys, at least on the surface, appear to be racist, like, there is a whole other, again, imperialistic sort of UK national thing going on that we've allowed on our streets for all my entire life. So I think we need to take that knowledge and that understanding and now start applying it across the board.
One of the ways I think that what makes it easy to sort of forget or to turn a blind eye to the realities of these things is because you get big symbols of progress, like, there you go, Barack Obama elected president, and then so people go, oh well, racism's over then, that's finished.
Seen quite a lot of people on Facebook and across social media is using the old, like, I don't see colour and I don't see race. And that would be okay if there wasn't examples of institutionalised racism. I think that what Matt was saying earlier on was something that I was trying to stress to somebody, is that nobody's pointing the finger at you. This is wider, this is bigger. It's about the institutions that we live under. If you look at any statistics, it backs up the fact that we are, as a society, racist, and this is the type of racism that we're trying to get out. Like, I think that this is the way that it's been sold to people, is that it's a personal attack, so that we end up fighting against each other, and we end up, people that I went to school with are standing in George Square on the opposite side for me. And I grew up in the exact same place in the exact same way that they did in general, was like a sort of broad stroke. But I genuinely think that we've got more in common than what, what I mean. We're actually trying to fight against the same power structures. It's just that we don't realise it quite, and we're too busy sort of butting heads against each other.
Exactly. Right.
Tommy, what's your experience being sort of post kind of coming out with what happened to you last week? Because obviously we've talked a number of times about your Facebook post that had a lot of comments, a lot of attracted a lot of attention. Have you seen a continuance of some of the abuse that you received, or you found that actually there's people pushing back with you?
No, it's been great. It's been a mental week, so I've spent the whole week talking about this, or talking to police about it, or responding to messages that I've received and that kind of thing. So it's mostly been positive. I was really moved by all this sort of concern and supportive messages I received. What I didn't do, and I've no real intention of doing, is looking at the comments of that on that post.
Okay.
Some of the messages I did receive from friends, whatever, said, "Oh, just ignore all that." And I thought, I'm not going to sit and read through posts of folk calling me a liar or bad mouthing me.
Yeah. Which is exactly your tactic anyway. So cool.
Unless it's in relation to haircuts, Matt, of course, then we read the comments.
Haircuts, we respond to haircuts, but nothing else.
Of course. There has been a lot of sort of chat, and this has been something that's really interested me in the past couple of weeks. And I think me and Matt haven't been on and did a podcast in a couple of weeks just because of lockdown and trying to get guests in. It's difficult, and obviously this isn't the most ideal way to have a conversation with somebody, is over you've never met them before and then you get them into a Zoom call. But there has been a lot of distraction when it comes to social distancing. I think that in the weeks before the BLM protest and the protests that we've seen subsequently in George Square, or whether it's statue defending or refugee rights protests, we had a huge outcry about Dominic Cummings breaking social distancing rules. And I think that one of the sort of things that struck me is that a lot of people that were sort of pointing the finger and screaming that about breaking social distancing rules were then saying that it's that the BLM protest has got a right to go there and do the same sort of thing. Now, to me, I agree with that. I completely and utterly agree with that. I think that there are things that are bigger than the situation that we find ourselves in. But how do you fight against that sort of accusation of hypocrisy when we are encouraged to stay away from each other constantly, but then we need to sort of come out with a message that this is bigger than the distancing rules and that we do need to go and protest this right now?
Yeah, exactly. it's just, I mean, yeah, it's hard to avoid that, that charge of hypocrisy, because it's, it's complex, and people prefer just a simple argument. So yeah, if you're breaking social distancing, I don't know, just just to go for a drive because you feel like it. I mean, that's not a good reason. It's just like anything, you have to make a calculation. Is that the risk you're taking? Is this worth it? And I guess in the case of the Black Lives Matter protest, people have said, yeah, it's worth this risk. This is more important.
Yeah, and it'll not be the first time that people have essentially take risks with their lives to protest in favour of black, rights and equality.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's something that probably does kind of fit, with the past in that respect. Like, I found in terms of social distancing, some members of the day for George Square quite worrying. Again, we're probably going to just sort of briefly touch on the police approach, because it is difficult when there's no public recognition of their tactics. You've obviously explained at the start of the show that although there was no public thing happening, there was lots happening behind the scenes, which again, we were both reassured by. Today, I don't know if you've seen any of the images of the sort of Black Lives Matter protest that did go ahead in George Square. Some of the scenes were extremely encouraging, and I think, I kept my distance because I've got vulnerable people in the house, but like when we, solidarity with BLM a couple of weeks ago, I just want to say, well played to everybody in George Square today, because they represent the Glasgow that I want to be part of, and a Glasgow that I'm proud of. But on the other side of it, we've seen peaceful protesters kettled, and the disregard for social distancing that went into place today seemed to be potentially a really dangerous thing, especially when protesters go out their way to actually maintain 2 meters. So, I mean, we've seen.
So you saying was there kettling today?
So the police went in and kettled George Square at the protest. So again, there's conflicting stories about why. So I probably don't want to go into what accusations have been flung about just now, because I don't actually know the true story. But the images themselves were pretty stark. That right wing, alt-right, fascists, whatever we want to call them, were given the run of George twice this week. But people show up into George Square and take a knee there. They're then kettled, and which in itself is a really unpleasant experience for people who have actually went through it. It's about, it feels very much like you're being antagonised. It feels very much like your space has been invaded. It's no pleasant in that circumstance. With COVID and questions of social distancing into the mix as well, I'd be really keen to probably hear from the police as to what their thinking behind that was, because that seems absolutely lunacy to me. Have you seen, in terms of the protests, are social distancing being largely sort of honoured?
I think, it's, you don't want to draw in broad strokes, but I mean, this is my experience. Black Lives Matters protest. I think that those protesters have been socially distancing where possible. Just it's a sensible thing to do. Among the fascists, the loyalists, whatever, in George Square. No, I mean, they could give a shit.
Fair enough.
I mean, you've got to imagine that they're probably not doing it anyway, day to day.
Exactly, yeah.
Just not giving a fuck. I mean, like we were talking earlier on, everything's been politicised, and unfortunately for these guys, even the wearing a mask seems to be a political battering ram. I was on my bike on Wednesday and went down Buchanan Street. I stay in town. I went down Buchanan Street with a mask on, and somebody shouted, "Take your mask off, you Fenian bastard!" And you're like, okay, so
wow.
That's and this is like a fine example for me about like something that you were talking about at the sort of top when we were first talking, that people just assumed why your motivation and why you were there last weekend based on a couple of things, but based on mainly the way that you look, and that they assume that's what it is that they just make assumptions. But I thought I did have a laugh. I had a laugh to myself when the guy shouted it, but then I did think about it and thinking about like how mental that is, that guy's seen me on a bike with a mask on and just went, right, well, there's a Fenian. And I'm going to shout. Might have been
there's a stranger in the street that I can verbally abuse for absolutely no reason.
Yeah.
I think it shows what you're up against. I think it means things like education and changing people's minds on that side of things is extremely difficult, because when you're faced with somebody who can take a look at a journalist or a photographer or even just a guy in the street, and decide that I'm going to launch a triad at either physical or verbal abuse because that is my right, then how do we change minds? How do we educate people that don't really want it? You know what I mean?
What was different about that protest that was at last week as well is that generally when when you're press covering a protest, normally the protesters want to be photographed, or that's part of getting their message out, raising awareness.
Yep.
I've never really been at a protest before where they definitely didn't want to be photographed, which makes you wonder, do they have some sense of shame then? Do they know that what they're doing is wrong, maybe there's some more nefarious reasons why they don't want their pictures taken. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be shame rather than they know why they're there, they know what they're going to be doing, and they don't want to be documented being an arsehole or going there looking for a fight, because that's the accusations.
They don't want their bosses getting emails.
I suppose, somebody taking a photograph, and it really does bewilder me. And again, there's guys on the other side there. Me and Matt grew up in the East End, and there are guys there. And back in 2014, the morning after the independence vote, I was looking at images of 2 or 3 guys that were right at the front with their Union Jacks that I went to school with, that I hung about with when I was younger. And I just think, where did it go wrong for you, mate? That you've went and get pissed up in a pub on Duke Street and then decided to walk along and pick on people that are there peacefully. And do you know what I mean? It's just, it really does, that was like a life-changing moment for me. When I seen that, was shocked to my core. And yeah, I think that I can't get my head around it. I really can't. I mean, they really do believe that the British culture, that European, American, Western culture is under attack by the communist, socialist, radical left, and that we must fight. And you're like, fight for what? Like, what do you have that's worth fighting for, mate? Like, I'm sorry to say that we're working class, or we're working on middle class, whatever, but we've got, again, what I was saying earlier on, we've got more in common, and we should be fighting for people's rights. This is why we're here. We're not here to take your culture away. We're not here to steal anything from you. We actually want to give more to people like you, and we are the same. So why can we not get on the same side?
There's the old joke about a banker, an immigrant, and a Daily Mail reader, and they're sat around a plate of 12 biscuits. The banker takes 11 biscuits and then says to the Daily Mail reader, "Watch him, he wants your biscuit."
And that's where we live. and that is it. That is exactly where we live. And it's hard to convince people that somehow or another have got, I mean, to me, it's like they've been radicalised. It really is. I mean, they've been radicalised into believing that the Queen cares, that what goes on in their life, that somehow they're affiliated to this elite that exists that genuinely would not wipe the shit. Do you know what I mean? Like would trample over them. Do you know what I mean? And this is what we're dealing with. But how we actually deal with it, I'm kind of like with you guys, where I don't know. I mean, other than educating people,
I think it's probably the biggest fallacy of white supremacy is that when you look at the people who actually believe in it, you think to yourself, you are the supreme entity. You're the ideal incarnation of humanity. Like, maybe no. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I mean, as we start to wrap up, I mean, you've given us an hour of your time. We're just approaching now, and thanks very much, man. What are the types of we spoke a lot just when we first went into lockdown, and I don't want to let this go. I really don't want to let these ideas go. But what are the sort of positive changes that you would like to see post-COVID and post-pandemic? Me and Matt have spoke about loads of different stuff, like UBI, which is becoming a more popular idea because it really does suit the time that we live in. I've noticed a lot of stuff like I mean, just the fact that you can't buy a bike, I think is probably like a good thing. There's a lot more sort of health and fitness. People are becoming more aware of how important it is,
absolutely.
like their mental health. But what are the types of things that you would like to see sort of like taken from this situation into whatever it is that we go back to?
I mean, on a sort of more personal level rather than, well, it's personal, so it's kind of the same thing, I suppose. I have really enjoyed lockdown for discovering, what it is I actually need out of life rather than just what I want. And I've discovered so much. I think about all this sort of shit I was running around doing. Like, why was I doing that? I don't need that at all. And it's a lot of it's, for example, social, like FOMO. That's gone. I don't think, what's everyone else up to? Because what they're up to in the house, same as you. And I hope to sort of take some of that peace of mind out and just to be able to feel that kind of content even when things do start again. What would be nice is to some of the takeaways, like on a more social scale, would be, maybe a lot of I'm sure a lot of people who work in offices or companies, based in offices, are now saying, well, would we, things have the world hasn't ended. Why do we need to come into work anyway? Why, we can work from home. And as you say, stuff like universal basic income, or stuff like a 4-day working week. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I hope. I mean, big upheaval like this, it is a great opportunity to sort of examine the sort of things, the norms that we kind of take for granted, maybe challenge them as well.
Absolutely. Like for me, I mean, I was spending about nearly £200 a month in Starbucks. That I instantly was just like, why the fuck am I doing that? And it is like almost like this perpetual thing in your life where you add wee bits in and it becomes a routine, but then you don't really evaluate its worth to you, and the opposite, like what negative impact. I think just in general, people became hyper aware of well-being, and I would like to see more well-being being spoke about as far as like in the economy and how they structure things. I would love to see like these types of things, but then we have motorway jam-packed when McDonald's opens its doors with people flocking back to get a Big Mac. So I don't know.
I think that one of the likeliest, lasting positives will be, as you say, people cycling, which is really great because the studies show that if you, the studies actually show that if you build cycle lanes for people to use them, we're doing it the other way around here. Whereas now that people are cycling, hopefully it'll improve the usability of the city for cyclists. Glasgow's not that great for cyclists.
No, it definitely is not. And I've just discovered that because the bike that I've bought is the first bike that I've owned since I was 17. So, and then you do realise that it's a shit show. I mean, it's like a fucking free-for-all when you're trying to cycle about town. And town's supposed to be the best.
Well, I mean, I tried to do the next bike thing last week, and there is absolutely, I think there's one next bike station in the entire east end of Glasgow, and it's at the Royal Infirmary, which is practical, so I'd need to walk for like 4 miles to get to the bike in the first place. So I think if we're going to talk about cycling, they definitely need to look at the East End infrastructure for that, you know what I mean? Because it was a lovely day, and I said, I'll get myself a wee bike. I think I was actually coming to see you, and no, not a single bike. I'd have to walk to yours anyway to get one. You know what I mean? I think in terms of what I'd like to see change, particularly in the context of the last couple of weeks, is for us to actually be able to confront ideas of race and war history and colonialism and all these things that we've discussed without the need for the violence that you faced, because you don't really ever win an argument with violence. You know what I mean? I'd like us to see what's went on in the last year in terms of marches and disorder and actually really crack down on the people that are causing the trouble and allow other people's right to free expression, free speech and to gather and protest to not be interrupted by thugs. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I hope, your story is something that takes us on the path to that.
I hope so, yeah. I mean, I'm just glad to be able to use the experience in that way, because I'm absolutely fine, to be honest. People have been very nice, people reaching out to check on me in that way. But yeah, I'm just glad to use it to raise sort of awareness of, bigger issues.
Absolutely, mate. Do you want to just give yourself a wee what would we call it? A wee punt. Like, where can people find your photography? I just give your socials a wee bit of a promote.
Yeah, absolutely. So the main social I use, the main place I share my work is Instagram. That's Instagram is TGKWAN.
Okay, mate. Perfect. Thanks very much for giving us an hour of your time. I'm sure that you're probably very much in demand, and I know that you weren't feeling well overnight. So
I'm good now.
Thanks very much for that,
really
Tommy.
Appreciate the time, man.
Take care of yourself, buddy. Cheers, mate. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You know you show the fear inside, it grows below the upper line. Oh, you know you try to hold you tightly by my side when all is crashing down. You'll never reach the surface, you live underground. Sky fire comes around when the steel ring falls to the ground. There is panic on the streets, a blackened sea full of shuffling feet. Sky fire, can't you see? You can try but you won't break me. It all alive is burning bright, and I won't back out. It's day to day, night to night. We have no choice who gets to roll the dice. You'll never reach the surface, you live underground. Sky fire comes around when the steel ring falls to the ground. There is panic on the streets, a blackened sea full of shuffling feet. Sky fire, can't you see? You can try but you won't break me. Sky fire comes around when the steel ring falls to the ground. There is panic on the streets, a blackened sea full of shuffling feet. Sky fire, can't you see? You can try but you won't break me.